Imagine knowing that a killer could walk into a city, commit horrific crimes, and then simply disappear. So no arrest, no courtroom, no confession, and sometimes not even a name. For decades, investigators have chased killers whose identities remained a mystery. Some left behind clues, some left almost nothing. And in a few cases, the person responsible may have lived an ordinary life while investigators were still searching for answers. Today, we're going back through some of the most disturbing unsolved serial killer cases in history. And the strangest part? Some of these mysteries have survived for generations. Let's start with one of the most famous unsolved cases ever, Jack the Ripper. In 1888, a series of brutal murders terrified London's Whitechapel district. Several women were killed in a remarkably short period of time. Newspapers exploded with theories. Police investigated countless suspects. Letters supposedly written by the killer appeared, and rumors spread throughout London. But there was one enormous problem. Nobody could prove who the killer actually was. Hundreds of suspects have been proposed over the years: doctors, workers, criminals, even members of the upper class. But the true identity of Jack the Ripper has never been conclusively established. More than a century later, the mystery is still alive. But Jack the Ripper wasn't the only killer to leave investigators with unanswered questions. In the United States, another case became famous for a completely different reason: the Zodiac Killer. During the late 1960s, a killer attacked people in Northern California. But what made the case extraordinary wasn't just the murders, it was the communication. The Zodiac Killer sent letters to newspapers and included strange cryptograms. Some of these messages challenged investigators to identify him. One famous cipher remained unsolved for decades. Then, in 2020, a team of private codebreakers finally announced that they had solved it. But even after the message was decoded, the killer's identity remained unknown. The person behind the Zodiac name had disappeared into history. And then there's another mystery, one that became famous because investigators couldn't even determine who the victims were: the Phantom Killer. In 1946, a series of attacks occurred around Texarkana, a city located on the border of Texas and Arkansas. The attacker became known as the Phantom Killer. The case created enormous fear in the local community. People became afraid to go out at night. Rumors spread. Police searched for suspects, but despite a massive investigation, the killer was never conclusively identified. And that raises a disturbing question. How can someone commit multiple crimes, leave an entire community terrified, and still disappear? Sometimes the answer may simply be that investigators didn't have the technology we have today. No DNA databases, no modern surveillance networks, no smartphones recording every movement, no internet. And sometimes even the evidence that existed was lost, contaminated, or impossible to interpret. But perhaps the most fascinating part of these cases is what happened after the crimes stopped. Because when a serial killer disappears, the mystery doesn't disappear with them. It becomes part of history. Investigators continue searching. Journalists investigate old evidence. Amateur detectives study documents. And new technology can sometimes reopen cases that seemed impossible to solve. DNA analysis has already helped investigators identify suspects in some historical cases. Digital databases can connect crimes that once appeared unrelated. And old documents can reveal details investigators may have missed decades earlier. But there is still a limit. Technology can find clues, but it can't create evidence that never existed. And that's why some cases remain unsolved. The killer may have died, the evidence may have disappeared, witnesses may no longer be alive, or investigators may simply have never known where to look. And that brings us back to the biggest mystery. When we imagine a serial killer, we often imagine someone who looks obviously dangerous, someone who stands out, someone everyone remembers. But history tells us something much more unsettling. A person can commit terrible crimes and still disappear into an ordinary crowd. They can have a job, neighbors, friends, a completely normal-looking life, and nobody may ever realize what they were hiding. That's what makes unsolved serial killer cases so fascinating and so disturbing, because the mystery isn't only about who committed the crimes. It's also about how easily a human being can disappear into history. A name can be forgotten, a face can vanish, evidence can disappear, but the unanswered question remains: who were they? Where did they go? And how many mysteries from the past are still waiting for someone to finally solve them? Because sometimes history doesn't give us the ending. It only leaves behind the clues. And somewhere between those clues, maybe a story that has remained unsolved for more than a century.